All right, I'm sure some other people will trickle in, but want to go ahead and get started. Okay, so today, and again, I'm a little bit out of sorts today. I got power back at like 4 p.m. yesterday after having it pretty much not having it all weekend, so definitely messed with what I had planned to get done. So if you've not done The People versus Larry Flynt, I would encourage you to do that hopefully by Tuesday. You do have the option, again, I'll say it, to miss one of these during the course of the semester, but the rest of the semester does have a lot more work in it, right? Just because they have to do so much kind of laying groundwork, especially at the beginning of the semester, to kind of introduce these concepts. By necessity, we're just a little bit more backloaded with how our assignments come out. So definitely make sure, I would take advantage of this one if you can, but feel free to wait for the other three. It won't hurt you negatively with your grade. I know that this week, according to the syllabus, we have something due, but like it says in the syllabus, you do not actually have an assignment due until I tell you when it is due. I will be posting, I was going to do it today, but obviously got behind because of no power. I will be posting this week your legal analysis, and that'll be due next week, okay? So you'll have a full week to do it. I'll explain exactly how it works. You guys don't really need to worry about it right this very second. So ignore the syllabus. You don't actually have something due this week for your legal analysis. Number two, I wanted to just quick talk about, this is just a news article. Something that I saw has been discussed after former President Trump was acquitted during his impeachment trial. Now, during his impeachment trial, 57 senators voted to convict, 43 voted to acquit. You need 67, 2/3 majority in order to convict a president for impeachment or anybody for impeachment, and that is why President Trump was found essentially not guilty of the crimes against him. Now, what's interesting is there is a move. I don't know if it'll get much traction, but there is a move from something of a bipartisan support to essentially classify what happened on January 6th at the Capitol as an act of insurrection or rebellion against the United States of America. And under the 14th Amendment, individuals who have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States government are ineligible for public office. This was done after the Civil War. We didn't want a bunch of Confederate officers to get into Congress and start, trying to undo all the work that had been done after, after the Civil War. It's why we didn't let British people hold public office after the Revolutionary War, right? And so and if that happens, and Congress determines that President Trump has engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States, then there's an argument he can be disqualified from running again, which he has expressed some interest in doing, rerunning for president in 2024. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Everything is speculative at this point, but I just wanted to kind of give you guys an idea as to what's happening in the news right now. So, okay, today is defamation. Defamation is another, we're not going to watch this clip because it keeps getting, whenever I try to upload stuff, whenever I play copyrighted clips, it tags it and doesn't let me play it, so I post it to YouTube. So there's the Spider-Man scene where J.K. Simmons says that it's not slander against Spider-Man when he prints what he's printing because libel is spoken. And that's true, okay? So defamation, generally defined, is an expression that tends to damage a person's standing in the community through words that attach to an individual's character or professional responsibility. Now, again, libel is written down and distributed. Slander is spoken. For the purposes of this class, there is no functional difference, okay? The elements are the same. How a case is prosecuted or how a case is tried is relatively the same. So we're going to treat them the same. And really, I'm not even going to refer to it too much as libel or slander. Instead, I'll be referring to it as the more general defamation. And to kind of get this out of the way as well, there is such a thing as criminal defamation, right? You can be arrested for defamation. You can be arrested for slander. However, it is exceedingly rare and is incredibly difficult to sell to a court. And that is because in the past especially, and when you look at more autocratic regimes around the world, they use defamation as a way to suppress speech. Journalist says something that the government doesn't like, they're going to arrest them and charge them with criminal defamation. Additionally, that is one of the main reasons that we rebelled against the British in 1776, was the kind of oppressive use of defamation laws, and people were arrested for insulting or saying false things about the king. And it's always very problematic when the government is able to be put in a position to determine what is true and what is false. Now, defamation is an economic tort. And again, I'm not going to test you on what a tort is, but a tort, if you hear that language, is essentially a legally redressable harm. And that's really all it is. I was injured in some way, shape, or form. Therefore, you should pay, you should do something to make me whole again. You should pay me money. You should stop doing what it is you're doing. If you steal a particular item that I like, you should be forced to give me that item back. Car accidents are torts. Wrongful death suits are torts. So a lot of times when somebody is suing somebody for something and seeking damages, it's really what you're typically looking at, a tort. Okay, so let's talk about who can even sue in these cases. Living people can sue. Everybody in this room can sue. And corporations and organizations can sue. So Bill Gates is the former head of Microsoft. He's no longer, but he's the former head of Microsoft. I say something that Bill Gates says that considers defamatory about his time at Microsoft. Bill Gates can sue me, and Microsoft can sue me. Who cannot sue? Dead people cannot sue, and the government cannot sue. So I write a story about how Steve Jobs bribed the Pentagon to provide MacBooks to, I don't know, CIA agents. Steve Jobs cannot sue me because he's dead. But there are lots of instances in which a dead person can sue, right? If I rip off Lord of the Rings and make my own Lord of the Rings movie, Tolkien's not alive. But I'm damn sure the Tolkien's estate is still going to sue me. Here, that's not the case. If I make a statement about a dead person, it is not defamation. Additionally, the government, the Pentagon cannot sue me because the Pentagon does not have a reputational interest that can be protected through civil suits. Okay, so here's going to be the thing that you're going to have to memorize, okay? And when we're looking at whether or not a defamation case is met and why it's so difficult to prove a defamation case in the United States is you got to meet these 6 factors. All of these elements must be met in order for defamation to have occurred. Number 1, defamation. There was defamatory language. Number 2, identification. The defamatory language was about the plaintiff. Number 3, publication. The publication was disseminated. Oh, I miscounted. Sorry. All right. Then we got fault. Number 4, that the defamation was published as a result of negligence or recklessness. 5, falsity. The statement was false. And number 6, we got personal harm to the plaintiff. We're going to go through these individually, don't worry. Okay, so here is defamation. Defamation is defined as statements that tend to expose a person to hatred, ridicule, or contempt. Now, a jury is going to determine whether the message in its everyday meaning defamed the person who is suing. Now, sometimes it's super easy to determine whether or not something is defamatory, whether or not something where the statement, if people believe it, is going to expose a person to hatred, ridicule, or contempt. If you are a doctor and somebody accuses you of stealing Vicodin and performing surgery, that is going to harm your reputation. If you are a public figure in a traditional marriage and somebody accuses you of being unfaithful to your husband or wife, that is going to expose you to hatred, ridicule, or contempt. So like some of them are easy, and actually some of them are even put down in law as by default defamatory. Criticizing somebody professional conduct, or saying that they engaged in a crime, or, and this is absolutely true, there are statutes in this country that say explicitly accusing somebody of having a venereal disease is defamatory as a matter of law. But it's not always quite that simple. And again, just because I don't want to deal with YouTube continuing to make my life really difficult. There we go. I'm going to explain to you what happened with Richard Simmons. Now, try to get some class participation. Does anybody know who Richard Simmons is? Very dated reference at this point, very popular in the 80s and early 90s. So I realized I was muted. Anybody online have an idea who Richard Simmons is?
All I know is he the one that's married to Kimora Lee Simmons? And
if Kimora Lee Simmons is the woman, then definitely not. So Richard Simmons, it would help if there was a picture. Okay, Richard Simmons was kind of the pioneer of what most people might call jazzercise. He wore incredibly spangly tank tops, and he was very energetic, and he would have people dance, and that's how they would get into shape. And he was very, for lack of a better term, very effeminate and very kind of, hooray. He was on Whose Line Is It Anyway? He was kind of one of those, he's kind of an early pioneer of celebrity trainers like the Beachbody guy or the people you see on Peloton. And a few years ago, probably 7-8 years ago now, he just disappeared from public life. He didn't do any interviews. He didn't market his name at all. He didn't go on the Today Show. He did nothing. He was gone. And around the same time that Bruce Jenner came out as transgendered and became Caitlyn Jenner, there were the National Enquirer ran a story that said Richard Simmons has removed himself from public life because he has decided to transition into being a woman. And they even ran photos that were from a Halloween party that had, Richard Simmons dressed up in women's clothing. And Richard Simmons sued. And he said, still a guy. Nothing against transgender people, nothing against women at all, but I am not one. And so this article is inaccurate and it is defamatory. I'm curious, legitimately, and if people aren't comfortable sharing, I understand, because it is a touchy subject. But I am curious as to what people think about that, because remember, a defamatory statement is not a false statement. If I write an article, if I put out something on Twitter and says, somebody came to my class wearing a red sweatshirt today. Nobody in here is wearing a red sweatshirt. Is that defamatory? Is that going to open you up to ridicule or hatred in your community? I'm sure that there could be some crazy hypothetical where it might, but generally not, right? So Richard Simmons can't simply say that the article was false. He's got to say that it was defamatory. Do you guys think saying somebody who is not a transgendered woman or man, saying that they are, do you think that that's defamatory? Yes or no? Yeah.
Towards academic brand.
Yeah.
I guess from that perspective, yes.
It's certainly going to with some people, right? There's going to be a non-zero number of people who are out there who think that being a transgendered individual is a negative thing, okay? So that is absolutely correct. The question becomes, are they representative? But no, that's a very good point, yeah. Exactly, because as we'll see in a little bit, what are we trying to protect here? It's not somebody's feelings, right? When we say that I've been defamed, give me money, it's not because my feelings are hurt. It's because my reputation has an economic interest. By you saying something bad about me, my economic interest is harmed. I should be compensated for that, right? This is not emotional distress. This is not anything else. And it's one of the reasons why dead people can't sue, because dead people don't have a reputation. It died. It's gone. So you can say whatever the heck you want about a dead person because they don't have a reputation to protect anymore. And so, yes, absolutely. Even if a small minority or a sizable minority of people believe this and it's considered defamatory, 70% of people might have a problem with it, but I can't. I would struggle with 30% loss of my income. I imagine a lot of people would struggle with 30% loss of their income. But there are lots of instances in which, but then you have the really justifiable concern that if we allow somebody like Richard Simmons to make this argument, then there's a risk that the court is viewing being transgendered as a negative, which it's not. In the same way, being of a different race. I think we can all agree that if I wrote an article saying somebody who looks white is actually black, and that's going to seriously mess up their credentials in a really racist part of rural America, we would all probably agree that the court really shouldn't be in a position of saying being black is a bad thing. That it's going to open people up to defamation or to ridicule, contempt, or whatever else. And that's what the court came to the conclusion is here. They said, essentially, that there might be a sizable number of people who are out there who view being transgendered as negative, but this court will not give those bigoted ideas credence. That was the court's language, essentially. And in one sense, just on a personal level, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? We want to have a more tolerant, open society. And saying that an individual being who they are is a negative, it goes against that open, tolerant society. But at the same time, it's really easy for a judge to say that, right? They're not the ones who are having this false thing said about them. You know, there's value in people being able to present yourself as you are, right? So I think that that's what the court, and so Aaron asked, did he win the court case for defamation against the company that wrote the article? And the answer is no. And not because it was false, not because, and we didn't even get to whether or not it was false, or whether or not that the National Enquirer had sufficient grounds to believe that he was a transgender individual. The case was dismissed because they said, even if it's true, or sorry, even if it's false, even if you are not a transgendered individual, even if the National Enquirer knew that they were lying about you and decided to lie about it anyway, you still don't get anything, because what the heck is wrong with being a transgendered woman? And so I think that's a really interesting case and kind of shows the risk that can be associated with judges trying to determine what is acceptable and what is not. And because this judge, whether or not you agree with this judge or not, really just made the decision based on their own value system and their own value judgments. And is that really what we want judges to do? I think that there's certainly an argument that it's not. Okay, so falsity. So first off, you got to show that it's defamatory, right? It exposes an individual to contempt, ridicule, or hatred. Now, it's got to be false. And really what I want you guys to know here is opinions cannot be considered defamatory, because opinions cannot be facts. I think that Applebee's is a terrible restaurant. And I do not, for the life of me, understand why somebody would go out to dinner and pay a company to microwave them food, which is basically what Applebee's does, I think. Again, that might be defamatory. I'm not entirely sure that's what they do. That's just what I have heard from people who work in the food industry. Applebee's sues me. They say, we don't suck. We're eating good in the neighborhood. How dare you? Can Applebee's prove that I'm wrong, that they suck? No, it's my opinion. I think The Godfather's an overrated movie. I do. Anybody prove me wrong? You can say it's got so many Oscar nominations and it's got, you know, it is on the AFI Top 100 list. And look at all of these directors and writers who cite The Godfather as the pinnacle of filmmaking, especially in the 1970s. Does that still mean that I can't think that somebody's overrated? Or that something's overrated? No. Now, and why do I have Guy Fieri here? Okay. My favorite piece of, I didn't overstate. one of my favorite pieces of American journalism over the past 10 years was an article by Pete Wells of the New York Times. And Pete Wells is the food critic up for the New York Times. And he reviewed Guy Fieri's American Kitchen and Bar. And it was this massive place in Times Square. And it had Guy Fieri and diners, drive-ins, and bars everywhere, right? And he just obliterated it. It is the worst review I have ever read in my life, and it is amazing. Just in terms of like 0 F's given type of critical writing. And Guy Fieri came back at him and said, no, you're wrong. This is why, good, hardworking New Yorkers, I guess, go to Times Square to eat at Guy Fieri's American Kitchen and Bar. But you can't sue, because Pete Wells thinking that his restaurant sucks. You can't prove that wrong. Now, there is an exception to this that I want to make sure that I'm not. Okay, so there is an exception to this before we get to Lance Armstrong. You cannot simply say, in my opinion, and have it be a get out of jail free card, okay? And there are several court cases that are like that, where somebody has said, in my opinion, this particular coach threw games because he was in debt to the mob. No, that's a statement of fact, right? That coach threw games because he was in debt to the mob. You putting, in my opinion, doesn't magically make it an opinion. Like there's that scene in Talladega Nights where Will Ferrell says, well, as long as I say with all due respect, I can say whatever I want. Kind of similar here, right? You can't just say something's an opinion. It actually has to be an opinion. Additionally, you can't attach an opinion, You can't attach an opinion to a statement of fact and still get out of jail free. So if Pete Wells had reviewed Guy Fieri's restaurant and said, in my opinion, it sucks because the food came out cold and the waitress slapped me in the face. The food being cold, the waitress slapping him in the face, those are statements of fact that can be verified. Simply because he says it sucks, because that doesn't make the entire thing an opinion. You still have those isolated statement of facts that can potentially be defamatory. Now, as a matter of law, truth is an absolute defense to a defamation claim. If you can prove that what you said is true, it doesn't matter how much of a jerk you were in saying it or how much it impacts somebody's reputation in the community, you do not lose. You win 100% of the time. As is opinion. If you can prove that it is opinion, not a statement of fact, you win 100% of the time. Falsity is the most important. I mean, they're all important because you've got to meet all of them, but truth or opinion, or saying that it's an opinion, or showing that it's opinion, are going to be the most important things you can do in order to win a defamation case as a defendant. Now, who has the burden of proving falsity? Now, it's going to vary based on the public status figure of the plaintiff, which we'll talk about here in a second. But we have a public figure, the plaintiff must prove falsity. Private figures, falsity is presumed and defendant can show truth. We'll get to that in a little bit, but essentially, in most cases, there is no presumption. If I sue somebody because we got into a car accident and I think they ran a red light, there is no presumption that I am telling the truth or that I am lying. We go into court with a 50-50 understanding that each are equally likely to happen, and then we can prove through testimony or through evidence that one of us is more likely to have been telling the truth, in which case we win. In defamation, it's a little bit different. There's a presumption when we're talking about a public figure or a matter of public concern that what I'm saying is true, and then the plaintiff has the burden and ability to then prove that it is false. Private figures, the presumption is that what is saying is false, and then the defendant, the person being sued, has the obligation to prove that it is true. And this is different from the United Kingdom, and we'll show why the United Kingdom, I'm not going to say it's wrong, I know better than that, and there's certainly downsides to the US system, as we'll see, but the dangers you run into when you have these presumptions, okay? So, we're going to watch Lance Armstrong real quick. And for those of you who, you guys know who Lance Armstrong is still, right? Okay. Because now, like, I'm thinking, like, you guys were like 4 when he was winning Tour de France. So, like, I got to be careful with this stuff now. But 7-time Tour de France winner. And for years, people were saying he was a doper. And he denied it quite strongly in clips that we are about to see.
Regardless of whether or not people accuse Lance Armstrong of doing something, regardless of whether or not they're questioning a relationship with a doctor, we have to look at the facts. We're sick and tired of these allegations, and we're going to do everything we can to fight them. They're absolutely untrue.
I've said it for 7 years. I've said it for longer than 7 years. I have never doped. If you consider my situation, a guy who comes back from arguably a death sentence, why would I then enter into a sport and dope myself up and risk my life again? That's crazy. I would never do that. No way. As far as I'm concerned, this is really going to be the end of the story. This is sort of my last public appearance on it, and there's nothing else I can do.
I've never taken performance-enhancing drugs.
Okay.
How could that have happened?
That was my point. It's not just simply you don't recall, just...
How many times do I have to say it?
I'm just trying to make sure your testimony is clear.
Well, if it can't be any clearer than I've never taken drugs, then incidents like that could never have happened.
Okay.
How clear is that?
Could you respond specifically to Floyd's claim that you and Johan taught him how to dope?
Other than saying it's not true?
We have nothing to say, we have nothing to hide.
He said he has nothing. He's got no proof. It's his word versus ours.
Okay, so Lance Armstrong, incredibly strong denial. And then he went on Oprah in 2013 and said, yeah, I was doping the entire time. And I've been doping since I started my cycling career. This is not new. Okay. So the reason I bring this up is because in the United Kingdom and in France, which follows defamation law of the United Kingdom pretty darn closely from my understanding, there were articles being written saying Lance Armstrong doped, right? We talked to doctors, we talked to former teammates that we believe, and here's the case that we believe Lance Armstrong doped. He sued them because, of course, he was in full-on deny this to the gills mode. And he won. He got a multi-million-dollar verdict against media organizations for defamation, for articles they wrote saying that he abused performance-enhancing drugs. And the reason that he won in Europe but not in the United States is because in the United Kingdom, the assumption, even for public figures, is that a statement made about them is false. And then the publication or the speaker has an obligation to prove the truth. And because a lot of what was said about Lance Armstrong in the court's opinion was based more on speculation, based on hearsay, based on rumor, and based on innuendo, they did not meet their burden of proving the truth of the claims. And therefore, they were liable for defamation. But as it turns out, they were telling the truth. And so you run the risk when you have a system like the United Kingdom where essentially it's a twofold risk, right? Number one, kind of look like you're an idiot when you make a news organization pay a couple $1 million to somebody who who, as it turns out, they were absolutely right about. Absolutely true. No question about it. And we want people to have free and open debate about public figures and public concern, matters of public concern. And if we worry that if we don't have an ironclad case that we can present to a jury of 12 people before we make an allegation or make a statement, and it's going to be incredibly difficult for us to have an open and honest conversation about public figures or things that affect us on a daily basis. Now, in order to maintain a case, the plaintiff must show the defamatory statement is of or about them individually. So it doesn't mean that they have to be literally named, right? So they don't have to say John Mark Boschini living at, in Northwest Greensboro. That it doesn't have to be that specific. So long as one reader or viewer of the publication is aware as to the identity of the individual, then identification is met. So even 99.99% of readers of the New York Times have no idea who this anonymous source is, if it's done with sufficient particularity that that person's boss or somebody that that person knows can identify them from what's in the article, they can sue. Now, the damages might be significantly less, right? Because if 1 million people know something about you, it's going to be a lot more damaging than if 2 people know about you. Not all the time. And the biggest problem that journalists run into, because they're kind of in the business by and large of naming people, right? You'll have some gossip columnists and stuff like that, like Page 6 in the New York Post is like, this late night staffer said blah, 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 right? And so it'll be like a blind item. You'll see some of the stuff like that, but by and large, journalism is about naming people or about being very specific as to who the heck you're talking about. A lot of the problem comes from media organizations naming the wrong person. Now, when I was at UNCG, I was editor of the Carolinian, the student newspaper here. And I went to Austin, Texas for their, it's called the Associated Collegiate Press. Essentially, it's the interest group for all the college newspapers. And one of the faculty advisors had a really interesting story. It was I kind of admired them that they were willing to talk about it. But they had gotten a tip that one of the staff members at the university had recently been booked on a sexual assault case, but that they were unsure as to which one was which. So what they did, being intrepid journalists, was they decided to get a staff directory and a list of bookings at the jail from the night previous. And they just cross-referenced it, right? They said these 7 people were booked on sexual assault related claims on the night of February 14th. We have the staff directory, and look, John Smith, we got our match. The problem is, the guy who was booked in county jail on February 14th was John Adam Smith, and the person who worked for the university was John Michael Smith. They named the wrong guy. So they ran an article saying this staff member was booked in jail for a crime. He was not. Now, is that defamatory as hell? Yes, it is. Even if somebody's not been convicted of anything, saying that somebody's been arrested on suspicion of sexual assault is absolutely going to open them up to ridicule or contempt. It was false. They had reason to believe it was false, as we'll talk about in a little bit, and he was identified. So that's certainly something that you want to be on the lookout for. All right, let's see if I can make this work. I'm not. Okay, so let me give you a kind of lowdown of what is going on. Does anybody see the movie Hustlers? Heard it's actually pretty good. J-Lo is very upset that she's not getting an Oscar nomination out of it, apparently. She was very good, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, Hustlers, theoretically, is based upon a true story. And that was a significant portion of the marketing, right? Based on a true story. These exotic dancers got their revenge on guys by drugging them and taking their credit cards and buying a bunch of stuff. And that absolutely happened, right? Somebody wrote a memoir about that. And J-Lo's character was based on a real person, not the same name. And you'll see that a lot in movies that are kind of about people, but are slightly different. A really good example is The Devil Wears Prada. Anybody's seen that? Really good. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's really good. But Miranda Priestly, does anybody know who Miranda Priestly, Meryl Streep's character, do we know who that is based on? Okay, it's based on a woman called Anna Wintour, who is I believe she still is, the executive editor of Vogue magazine. And Devil Wears Prada was not a real thing, right? It was not a memoir in the traditional sense. It just so happened that the author worked for Anna Wintour at the magazine Vogue for 9 months. And then she goes and writes a fictional book about an assistant who spends 9 months working for Miranda Priestly, who has the same characteristics and the same social life and the same job as Anna Wintour, working at a magazine called Runway, not Vogue. And so you see this a lot. But anyway, returning to J-Lo. The person that the character is based upon sued, saying, look, this character is based on me. You have her doing all of this stuff that I never did. Most importantly, manufacturing and selling drugs while her child was in the house. And she said, look, I never did that. I did some bad stuff, but I never in a million years would do something like that. Never in a million years would endanger my child. The judge who looked at the case said, no, because there's an understanding that when something in Hollywood is based upon a real life, that it doesn't mean that every single statement of fact, everything that happened in the movie occurred in real life. So therefore, you lose your case. Okay, so next thing is group libel. Group libel is another way to talk about identification. Individuals of large groups can't sue for comments made about those large groups. I am a lawyer. If somebody says, all lawyers are crooks, all lawyers just want to take your money and don't give a damn about your clients, I can't sue that person saying, I'm a lawyer, I care about my client, I haven't taken any of their money, I haven't broken any ethical rules, what do you know, I'm good, I'm fine. No, that's not how it works. Because nobody is going to listen to this Yahoo talk about how terrible all lawyers are and assign their negative or even false statement and apply it to me. This is especially going to be true when we're talking about members of race, occupation, genders, or religions. As terrible of a statement as something like all illegal immigrants are criminals who just want to take our jobs and send money back to whatever country they came from. Obviously a horrible statement. But not every person who is in this country undocumented is going to be able to say, I'm not a criminal. I'm not a drug user. I'm not this terrible thing that you said that I am. Because there are hundreds of thousands or millions, actually, there are millions of undocumented workers or individuals in this country. And no sane and rational person could take a statement about an entire massive group of people and say that it applies to literally every single one within that group. So the general rule that I use, and this is just a general rule, this is not based in law, it is not based in, or it's not based on a statute, it is not based on anything like that, it's just kind of a general rule that we've seen, is that people belonging to groups of more than 100 people cannot claim that the defamatory comments about the group as a whole are of and concerning them. So for example, let's use a real world example here. If I say something defamatory about UNCG students in general, all UNCG students cheated on their SATs to get admitted into UNC, to get admitted here, right? Even if that's wrong, it obviously is. But even if that's wrong, the 3 people in the room today and the people online cannot sue me saying, I didn't cheat on my SATs, how dare you? Because you're part of too big of a group. Now, if I say all members of Media Law 470, Section 2, bribed Professor Donaldson so that they could get good grades in the introductory class in order to get into the media studies program at UNCG, okay, we're having a very different conversation because there are only 20 of you. And there's an understanding that if I say something about 20 individuals, it could apply to all 20 of you. In the same way, and again, I'm not going to play the clip here, but there was a guy called Don Imus. Don Imus died recently, but for a long time, he was kind of like the diet version of Howard Stern. Kind of like morning shock. All right. Kind of morning shock jock, say outrageous things and try to get a reaction out of it. Kind of what morning radio is kind of made for. And you guys can see what he called him. I'm not going to repeat it. It makes me, quite uncomfortable. But he said that about the women's basketball team at Rutgers when they were playing the Tennessee Volunteers back in 2006. I guess I'm using a lot of examples from my high school days today. I apologize. Anyway, but he said that about them, right? Now, is it defamatory? Probably not, because it's probably an opinion, probably not a statement of fact, but let's assume that it is. And the the Rutgers basketball team sues, saying, look, that is a misstatement of fact about all of us. They might be able to do that, even though Don Imus didn't say power forward, Nancy Smith. And he said the girls on the Rutgers, but only 12 of them. Small enough group where you might be able to make an argument that a statement about the group can apply to the individuals themselves. And that's really what we're doing, right? Is the group small enough where a statement about the group can attach to the individual? Okay, publication. To have a case for defamation, the plaintiff must show that the defamatory statement was communicated to someone other than the person who was allegedly defamed. Essentially, it has to be put down in writing and has to be shared with one other person in the individual who was defamed. So, defamatory statement here. CFO of a major company has been embezzling that company's funds to buy themselves a private jet. I am an individual who believes this. I sent an email to that CFO saying, I believe that you are an embezzler and you are taking people's money and using it for your own gains. Even if that's false. It's obviously defamatory, but even if it's false, even if I know it's false, I'm not going to win. Because who am I sure to win? Right? I already have an opinion on this guy's reputation, right? So it exists. He has an opinion on his reputation, and my communicating what I said to him does not change either one of our viewpoints, okay? His reputation is the same. The economic value of that reputation is the same from before I sent that email to after I sent that email. So even though I spoke it, even though it was identified, even though all the other elements are met, he doesn't have a case. Once one other person, once a third party is aware of my defamatory statement, all of a sudden, I got a defamation case. Because when I send that email, but let's say I copy the CEO on it, before I sent that email, his reputation was static. In my view, after I sent the email, his reputation was static. The CFO is the same. The CEO's view of the CFO is different from before I sent that email to after he reads it. And that's why we have this third-party element. Now, when the publication happens, normally doesn't matter a bit. But what I'm going to have you guys do for next class is we're going to be looking at a very specific case from 2014. It's the Rolling Stone defamation case that I want you guys to do some research on. And there's always been an understanding that people publish stuff once. The newspaper publishes it when they print it. Broadcasters publish something when it goes out to the audience. When I say something here, that is when I publish it. But the rise of the internet has really, really, really changed what it means to to publish something. When you publish something, and I put it, so let's say I put something on Facebook, right? Put a status. I can go and I can change that at any time. And every second I take to not change what I have published, that is essentially me republishing it, right? Because I can, presented with you, so if a newspaper publishes something and then is told new information, they can't they can't go find those hundreds of thousands of copies and burn all of them. That information is out there. But they can amend, if they're online, they can amend their original story. And so when we're looking at fault, as we'll look at in a little bit, most of the time we're talking about the initial publication, we're going to be, what did the newspaper, what did the individual know at the time they sent that news story to the printer? But in the internet age, we're going to be looking, if the newspaper keeps that story up unaltered, they're presented with new information, and it should have made them aware that what they were saying was false, and that all of a sudden becomes relevant information. We'll talk about that when we're looking at the Rolling Stone case. And this is the other thing we're going to be looking at. I'm just going to, it's just easier to talk about the real world example, but I wanted to get through as much of the elements here today as possible. Publisher liability, you can be held liable for defamatory statements made in your publications, even if you're not the one who was making them. So one of the other things I'm going to have you guys look at is SmartAttic, which is a election software company. They're suing Fox News, and they're suing Fox News, A, because some of the stuff that Fox News hosts actually said, but also when they invited Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood, and Rudy Giuliani on their networks to make allegedly defamatory statements about these companies stealing the election for Joe Biden, they're going to go after not only Rudy Giuliani, not only Sidney Powell, not only Lynn Wood, but they're also going to go after Fox News, because Fox News gave them a platform to spout their conspiracy theories. Okay. Excuse me. So, fault. And actually, up until now, by and large, most of the time, this is going to be really easy. Very few cases are going to come down to whether or not the plaintiff was identified. The Richard Simmons case that I gave you guys, that is an outlier. Most of the time, we know what is defamatory, what is negative, and what is not. Most of the time, we're going to be able to show that something is, most of the time, whether or not something is true or false is not that complicated. Did this person embezzle money? Did they not? Most of the time, these high-profile cases are going to come down to fault. That what was said was untrue and was, and later can be proven to be untrue. But like all torts in the United States, the plaintiff can't be held liable without some degree of fault, okay? So to use my car accident example, I run a red light, I hit somebody with my car, okay, by and large, I'm going to be held liable for that. I'm going to owe that person damages. But only if I was negligent, right? Only if I was texting, only if I was drunk, only if something like that, right? If I have no previous health conditions and I suffer a stroke and I go through that intersection, I'm not going to be held liable for that because I wasn't negligent. I didn't do anything wrong. It was a crazy accident. It's not really my fault. And in the same way, we don't hold somebody random liable because a tree fell on somebody's house during an ice storm. We're not going to hold somebody liable when they didn't engage in any bad behavior. And for the majority of this nation's history, actually, and in most other places, defamation has the same fault requirement as every other tort, or most other torts anyway, which is negligence. You did not act reasonably. You did not act as somebody with a typical standard of care, whatever fancy terminology or legalese you want to use. You messed up. You did something wrong that other people would not do, or you at least did not comport yourself with societal expectations. And even in torts where it's something other than negligent, like so intentional, right? With something like assault, we got to know that you intended to hit that person in the face and have done it accidentally. That's also pretty common, right? What's different about defamation, it makes it kind of difficult to evaluate. Really, I'm going to be honest, a very confusing type of tort that, gets lawyers paid a lot, is that what level of fault that should be assigned to an individual is dependent on who that person is. Not the speaker, but the person being spoken about. So let's give an example. But let's first look at New York Times versus Sullivan. And we're not going to really get too, let me give you kind of just a very brief overview of what happened in New York Times versus Sullivan. The New York Times would run kind of paid content dressed up as news articles. And you'll see this if you look through a magazine now, it'll say paid content, but it'll be kind of presented as a news article. And they did that for an organization called Heed Their Rising Voices. And Heed Their Rising Voices was an advocacy organization active in Alabama and other parts of the South during the 1960s civil rights movement. And in it, they made the case for the horrible things that were happening to African Americans and other minorities down in Jim Crow South. And in their laying out of argument, Heed Their Rising Voices did make misstatements of fact. They just did. They said that Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested by a particular sheriff 6 times, when in fact he was only arrested 4 times. They said that the dining hall was at a predominantly black university was padlocked, when in fact it wasn't. They gave incorrect reasons as to why certain students were expelled, right? So they were wrong. It's absolutely incorrect. And so the, excuse me. And so Sullivan, the sheriff, or the the sheriff, sued, saying what he said was defamatory. And the New York Times versus Sullivan Court in a 9-0 decision, so this wasn't close. Like, it wasn't a particularly close. I mean, it was a unanimous decision. They came up with a couple of rules. What they said is that, like, courts, number one, courts can't require media outlets to prove the truth of their accusations in cases of public concern. Instead, it would be up to the plaintiff to prove falsity. So it shifted the burden of proof from the defendant to prove that what they said was true to the plaintiff to prove what was said was false. Number two, a public official can't recover damages for defamatory falsehood regarding his official conduct, and thus the statement was made with what's actual malice. And if I could tell you the most misunderstood aspect of defamation law by classes and the population at large, it would be this thing called actual malice. Actual malice is when somebody makes a statement with knowledge that the statement was false or reckless disregard for whether it was false. This is a subjective standard. You have to prove that somebody knew what they were saying was false or comprehended in their mind that they were ignoring very clear signs that they were about to say something that was likely to be false. Essentially, if you're a massive idiot and you just are too dumb to see all these red flags as to why what you're about to say is most likely false, you don't meet the actual malice standard. And so if you're making these statements about a public figure or public official, you're good. You're off scot-free. Additionally, actual malice and falsity must be proven via what's called clear and convincing evidence. And clear and convincing evidence is evidence that is not beyond a reasonable doubt, right? So we're not in the context of criminal court. But in most cases in civil court, we are operating on what's called a preponderance of the evidence standard. Preponderance of the evidence means more likely than not. So back to my car example, right? If I can, if the question is, did I run a red light and hit that person's car? And if the answer is yes, then I'm liable, and no, I'm not. If the other side can prove with 50.0000001% certainty that I ran that red light, they win their case. Even if it's just a tiny, tiny little bit above a coin flip. Clear and convincing evidence, it doesn't mean that it's absolutely true or that no reasonable exceptions exist, but definitely a heightened standard. Okay, and I'll finish with this. In public officials, that was the New York Times versus Sullivan case, but in subsequent cases called Gertz and some other ones, the public official standard got broadened. And so we're going to go back and we're going to look at this next class, but I do want to at least introduce this subject before I let you guys go for the day. These are the people that when you say stuff about them, if they're going to sue you, they have to show that you made that statement with actual malice, that you made it with a knowledge that it was false or reckless disregard as to its falsity. Number one, public officials. Now, these are government employees who, by and large, are going to be elected or appointed to a position responsible for making or administering public funds, health, or safety. Some of these are going to be incredibly obvious. Governors, mayors, presidents of the United States, congresspeople, senators, people who are elected in the public eye and have a very significant interest not only in their public duties, but also in their personal life. But also, we can look at law enforcement officers. are law enforcement officers responsible for administering the law and making decisions that resulting in public health, funds, or safety? Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't mean everybody who receives a government paycheck, because the clerk of court down at the courthouse doesn't really have any discretionary responsibilities. They just process paperwork. Very important, not diminishing that, but they are not making substantive decisions where you need to be all that concerned about what they do in their private life. Number two, people called all-purpose public figures. These are private individuals who occupy positions of such persuasive power and influence that they are deemed a public figure for all purposes. Essentially, if you are so famous that people know your name, we're talking about the Tom Cruises, we're talking about the LeBron James, we're talking about the Serena Williams, right? These kind of really famous people that, you know, not only is the public aware of who they are, but they also get benefits from that fame. They get money, they get status, they get the ability to influence public debate. Okay, well, we're going to be interested in Serena Williams' tennis, but we're also going to be interested in her private life. Or at least the public has shown an interest in that private life. So if I talk about Serena Williams' tennis career and I say that she's doping, that's not true, and she wants to sue me, she's got to show that's actual malice. If I show that she has been cheating on her taxes for the past 50 or 20 years, okay, that's nothing that has very little, possibly, to do with her tennis career. She's still got to show that I act with actual malice, even though it's not for the reason that she's famous. And then finally, limited purpose public figures. These are individuals who are famous for a particular purpose, right? You don't know who they are, and they're not famous for every and all purpose, but you kind of have a general idea as to their fame for a particular controversy, a particular public thing. Now, for them, if I make a statement about why they're famous, so example, somebody like the president of the NRA, National Rifle Association, if I make a statement about that individual and it has to do with the representation of gun rights advocacy, then if they're going to sue me, they got to show that I act with actual malice. If I'm talking about that person's private life, whether or not they're faithful to their spouse, okay, that has zero to do with why we know who they are, because they're only famous for a very limited purpose. Then if they sue me, all they got to show is that I was negligent in making that false report. And that is where we will end it for today. I will have some reading for you guys on Wednesday, so I will post that tonight. Please be on the lookout for it. Video just a little bit, not much, but I want you guys to familiarize yourself with the cases we will look at on Wednesday, and I will see you then. Thanks, guys.